Welcome, everyone. We'll be joined by Kristen Urquiza soon. My name is Ken Inadomi, and we're coming to you from the 18th floor of the Yale Club here in New York City. We have people around the table and we have people that are tuning in. Really delighted to have our guests today, Aziz and Jon. And before I introduce them, I always like to say just a little bit about YANA, the Yale Alumni Nonprofit Alliance. It's ironic because this is the very room that YANA was founded back in 2011. January 2011, it was a snowy night. About 50 people had RSVP'd, but because of a blizzard, I think only 7 people ended up showing up. But in the 15 years hence, we've become one of the signature programs for social impact among Yale alumni. And we like to say that our mission is to organize and leverage Yale's social impact community for the greater good. And we really do that in 3 ways. And it's divided around generational lines. For recent grads and young alums, we like to help them get their start in social impact, either through internships, fellowships, job interviews, connections, and mentoring. For those that are in the mid stages, either on the ascendancy of their career or maybe at the peak of their career, we're trying to help them we're trying to give them access to best practices, access to funding, to board members, whatever they need to scale their organizations. And for the alums in the later stages of their career, people like myself that are either retired or semi-retired, we're trying to find ways for them to have meaningful ways to give back, whether as mentors or advisors or as board members. So it's this beautiful virtuous circle of service, right along the lines of what Yale is all about. And every month here at the Yale Club, the last Wednesday of each month, we have what we call a town hall, in which we like to open it up to interesting topics and guest speakers. And I see Kristen's here. Kristen, would you like to say a few words? This is Kristen Urquiza, who's the executive director for YANA. Kristen?
Hey, everyone. Good to see you. Really excited about our conversation today. Thank you so much, Jon and Aziz, for being with us, and welcome to everybody zooming in from across the globe and nation. And just a couple of things building off of what Ken shared. These monthly town halls happen the last Wednesday of each month, both in person and also on Zoom. We are gearing up for our big annual social impact conference in October, the end of October, the 24th. Folks may have seen in their email, we just sent out the link to get more information and register. So if these town halls are interesting to you, I think you'll really enjoy our conference. We have both an in-person option as well as a live stream option to join us. So I'll drop a link in the chat for you all to check out our conference, and we hope to be able to see many of you there. Final kind of piece on that is that I attended my first conference in October of 2023, 2 years ago. Came from California. And the reason why I joined is that I had been attending YANA offerings all throughout the pandemic, and it was really a great place for me to meet fellow mission-minded Yale alumni. And it really was coming to the conference that I realized that this community is my community of Yale people. And I believe very deeply in the mission of YANA, that in helping one another, we can make the world a better place on so many different issues that we all care about. Our conference theme this year is called Stronger Together, how to support nonprofits and one another in sort of uncertain times. So it's very relevant to what our sector is going through right now. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you all for being here. And again, Aziz and Jon, really excited for this conversation. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
Okay, thank you, Kristen. So tonight we're going to be hearing from Aziz Isham and Jon Mallow. And this really is a first. We've had over 500 town halls over the past 15 years. We've never had 2 Yale roommates, and we've never had 2 nonprofits that really weren't related, at least ostensibly related. But they're going to decode all that, and we're looking for a really great evening. Just a quick introduction. on my immediate right, Aziz Isham is the executive director of the Museum of Moving Image in Astoria, Queens. I have not been there, but one of our YANA board members, Lisa Rieger. In fact, it's really Lisa that we owe tonight for, because she's the one that put us in touch with both Jon and Aziz, and she said, "You have to meet these young men." Everyone's a young man to me.
Naked.
And then, so Aziz's roommate, class of 2000 at Branford College, was Jon Mallow. And both of them have deep media experience. Jon was a network executive. Aziz was an independent producer. We're going to let them talk about their story, how they went from the private sector to nonprofit. I think we're in for a really great evening. So I'll be quiet now, and let's turn it over and both of you will kind of play off each other, and then I'll interject as needed to steer the direction. Okay, Aziz, why don't you lead off?
Sure. So a little about the museum first, I guess, if you haven't been. I know at least one of you is a fan. Thank you. So the Museum of the Moving Image is a CIG institution in Astoria. That's a cultural institutions group. It's one of the kind of museums in New York City that receives support from the city itself, like the Met or the Natural History. We're there in Astoria, Queens, in Western Queens. We were founded in the mid-'80s. Originally, the museum was founded with sort of the idea of being a place to celebrate the history of filmmaking. It's right on the old Paramount Studios lot. And it's in a fantastic building. Now the building's fantastic. Back then it wasn't. But very early on in the founding, the founding directors and the founding executive director realized that there was a lot more to the moving image, even back then, than just film. So television was very quickly incorporated, and then it became the first museum in the world, actually, to have an exhibition on video games, and the first museum in the world to have a digital art curator. So really off from the beginning, it was this place where all forms of the moving image and all technology around the moving image was to be celebrated, was to be a place where people could experience these new technologies for the first time. Now we have continued that tradition. We're about to celebrate our 45th year, depending on when you actually count its founding, and we remain the place where people are like putting on VR goggles for the first time, or playing with AI to create a movie, or creating a stop motion animation from scratch, which is one of our most popular permanent exhibitions. I have been director there for about a year and a half now, so not that long. Prior to that, I ran a nonprofit, an international festival that was based in Cape Cod and had an office here in Brooklyn. And before that, I ran Brick TV, which is a community media network also in Brooklyn. And as Ken said, my background is as a film producer and a TV guy. That's kind of my brief overview. Before that, I was Jon's roommate.
There was like some period in between, I think, those two things. So hi, everyone. I'm Jon Mallow. I am the CEO of GMHC. GMHC is a social services organization that seeks to end AIDS and uplift the lives of those impacted by HIV. It was founded in 1982 as Gay Men's Health Crisis, and was the first ever HIV/AIDS organization in the world. It has evolved a lot since. So in the beginning, it was really about responding to a very present crisis that we knew very little about, and that the government wasn't really paying attention to. That spirit, I think, remains, but we've obviously evolved a lot over the 43 years. And now we offer a wide variety of supportive services that are intended to create a stable foundation on which people can have happy and healthy lives. So what that looks like is that we do the things that I think people associate with us, like HIV testing, STI testing, prevention, outreach, sexual health education. But also we offer a really broad and kind of holistically minded set of programs that include housing. We operate over 400 units of supportive housing across the city. Food, we have a dining room that serves lunch 4 days a week, and we also deliver food. Mental health services, substance use services, legal services. And we do a lot of it in our building, which is, or in our office, which is on 38th Street. But we also kind of spread out across the city and meet people where they are. I think maybe we can get into this in a little bit later. I was going to talk about sort of what our how we think about how I think about how we talk about our services, but let's save that. Before that, I worked at TED, like TED Talks, which is also a nonprofit, but a completely different one. It has a bigger budget than GMHC, but it's entirely privately funded, whereas GMHC has significant government funding from all levels of government. So a significant portion from the federal government, which we could talk about if you want, a significant portion from the state government, and a significant portion from the city.
So the commonality that we're going to explore tonight is storytelling. And it's something that's kind of inherent with any nonprofit, because how you tell your story is really how you convey your message, how you fundraise, how you organize your strategy. And we thought that to have Jon in conversation with Aziz would be fascinating, because both of them were storytellers before they assumed their roles as leadership of their nonprofits. And if both of you could talk about how you've developed your narrative and how you've even inspired each other in your mutual storytelling, I think that would really be of interest to the audience.
Well, I think that, the executive director role ideally should be very, very limited to a few things, right? It should be creating the narrative and the overall strategy for the organization, hiring really, really good people, and making sure that the fundraising and the financials of the institution are secure. Like, for me, beyond that gets into the nitty-gritty of programming and actual care services and stuff like that. And ideally, like if you're talking about a nonprofit of significant size, obviously, and I've worked at smaller nonprofits where I also do the dishes and put the chairs away. But for a museum like the size of ours, it's a pretty small and focused set of job responsibilities. And I think one of the most important ones of those is, as you're saying, like this idea of the story. What is the narrative of the institution, and how can we kind of use that narrative and as the cornerstone of everything that we do? Because it all really comes back to that. We use this word mission a lot, and yes, I think that's great, and it's good to have like a mission statement that you can kind of parrot out. And yes, I think that years of pitching television shows and movies and stuff like that has helped refine that kind of language. But I don't think the mission is enough. I think that it really is important to, to incorporate storytelling in everything that we do, at least as a nonprofit executive. So yeah, I think that's a big, similarity.
So I've been in this job for 7 weeks, so compared to Aziz, I'm very new. I was on the board of GMHC before, so I'm not new to the agency, but I'm new to this role. What I can say is that GMHC is blessed with this incredible legacy and history. When I go around places and talk about what I do, people often tell me things like, I volunteered there in 1991. I got my first HIV test there in 1985. My mother took me to AIDS Walk in 1999. But it happens all the time. And that's, it's incredibly wonderful, right? Like, there's this incredible history, and it was founded by a prominent guy named Larry Kramer in his living room. on, on Fifth Avenue, on Washington Square Park. There were a bunch of other kind of historically significant people in the room, and all of that is really wonderful. But also, it has a way of focusing us on the past. And I think part of the challenge that organizations like ours have today is to talk about why we're valuable in the present and in the future. And what I will say over the last, and so I agree with Aziz that my kind of experience developing creative before that was about that often included pitches, but also was sort of about how do you tell a story in a set amount of time. Like if I produced a 30-second thing versus a 5-minute thing versus a feature, like you really have to think about how you tell a story in the context for the audience that's going to see the thing. And I think that really applies to the work we're doing too. But I maybe this is true. Maybe I don't know if this is true for your. I mean, I'd be interested, right? Because like it feels to me from the outside like you're, like what you do is maybe more self-evident when you talk to people. Like you don't to explain. Is that true? Because sometimes I feel like people don't know what GMHC does, and part of what we need to do is develop the narrative to tell them that.
Yeah. I mean, I think in any room, in any one room, you'll meet people who have no idea what you do and people who are better experts than you are. Like, at least, I mean, I find that I've met people. I was at a dinner in LA about a month ago, and I sat down, and it was an old friend of mine from Iceland who I hadn't seen in a while. And he brought his friend who is the creative director of Minecraft, the video game. And I introduced myself and I was like, oh, have you been to the museum? Which is something I often ask people. And he's like, yeah, my favorite part is when you come out of the bathroom on the 3rd floor and you take a left, there's this, and he could exactly map out the layout of every single exhibit in the museum far better than I could, So I don't know. I mean, I think that is always like a mixture, and there's no one like rule of people who definitely know where you're coming from or don't. I think part of it is finding those commonalities, maybe.
Fair. I mean, the one thing I've been thinking about a lot, I sort of slightly lost my train of thought when I was talking before, but it feels to me like we're in a historic moment where there's similar kind of uncertainty, and there are these incredible lessons from GMHC's past that we need to, or from organizations like GMHC's past, that we can really learn from. And so the narrative challenge to me is about how do we kind of build on that history or stand on the shoulders of that history or take the right lessons from that history without being bogged down in it. And kind of how do we fly higher rather than sort of backwards. And so I'd love to, I mean, if we all talk, I'd love your thoughts on that too, like how you're also running an organization that has a 43-year past or about the same.
I didn't realize they were the same age. Yeah.
How do you balance those two things?
I don't know. I mean, I think that some people think of our museum as a place that's all about movies, and some people think of our museum as a place that where they, saw like some weird digital art experimental artist or that has 2 Namjoon Pikes. So, and I'm sure like some people come to you guys and they just think about the AIDS walk, and other people are much more aware of the work that you do, the grassroots work that you do. That's kind of what makes these nonprofits strong, I think, is like that we are able to speak the languages of those who are the recipients of our services, as well as those who are providing us with, like, frankly, the funds and the opportunities and the networks in order to continue doing the work, right? One of our biggest problems right now is that our board is entirely, or not entirely, but the majority of our board was composed around the idea of the history of filmmaking. And we really need board members and trustees who are fluent in digital technology, in gaming, we just had our first trustee join the group a couple months ago from one of the big tech companies, from Meta. That was the first time that we've ever had a trustee in from one of those tech companies, and we're a 40-year-old institution that deals with technology. It's like, so I think that's like a storytelling challenge that any nonprofit will have, like no matter what discipline you're dealing with, right? It's like this, like, who are you talking to? Who's the audience? What's the relationship to the history? What's the relationship to the future?
John and Aziz, can we go a little deeper in that? I know that you mentioned how the audience is changing. Obviously, there are generational differences. Do you see the story, the narrative changing as you skew younger or older, and how does the message change?
I mean, what I can say for me is that one of the things that we deal with, and in some ways it's a real blessing, is that there's a perception in many parts of the world that HIV and AIDS are not a crisis in this city. And I think that presents two challenges. One, we have to counter that argument and say, actually, that's not true. For many people, they remain crises. It's just that it's different people than it was before. And it's about intersecting issues that are causing it to be a crisis when it doesn't have to be. So in 1985, we didn't have effective treatments, and a lot of GMHC's work was about helping people die with dignity. Since the advent of successful treatment, GMHC has been more about helping people live successfully, which is this great thing. But then I also think for younger people who just don't remember, I mean, like who don't know the history or don't have the personal connection to the history that our sort of older audience or older community does. We have to talk about the things that they care about too. And I'm struck all the time by what people think are the big issues in the city. And I was at an event with a elected, and somebody asked him, and without thinking, he said, housing crisis and mental health crisis. And GMHC is on the front lines of both of those things, right? We have significant housing programs, we have significant mental health programs. And so I think what we have to do is think about like that, both how do we create urgency that people maybe sort of correctly, sort of incorrectly feel isn't there, and how do we be part of the urgent conversations that are happening about the things we're already doing. And that's kind of like, so I'd say that young people basically need a different entry point.
I think like my son will say, he's 9 years old, and he's like, you got to go to the museum because it's like the only place where you can play with screens, and like they like it, and they like let you do it, and they encourage you to like play with screens. And so youth and young people are not an issue for us by the nature of the work that we do. We're going to have, we have 70,000 students who come through our educational programs every year, and 80% of them from Title I schools. So we have a massive amount of young, middle schoolers, elementary schoolers, high schoolers. We have 120 interns at any time. So really, really, it is a very, very young museum. We don't have the issue that a lot of museums have, which is an aging demographic. Our demographic is 18 to 35. One of our biggest groups who come are parents with young children, or grandparents with young children. So that's a big part of our identity. I think the challenge for us is shifting our philanthropy to a new generation, because the older the philanthropy that the museum was founded on, which is basically Hollywood philanthropy, which is an extremely well-established strain of studio executives and studio leaders, and many of whom were part of the founding of the museum, some of whom are in LA, but a lot of whom are also in New York here, as well as labor unions. And that philanthropic river is drying. It has been drying up for a while, but because Hollywood and the entertainment industry in general is in, retreat, if we need to explore new forms of philanthropy in order to stay relevant. And I think that that's going to be that is a challenge. It's a challenge because a lot of young philanthropists don't think of the arts and don't think of museums as a valuable place for their philanthropic work. I think that's insane, but that's, that tends to be the trend. They're more drawn towards environmental causes, and I think it's also difficult because the technology industries that have replaced Hollywood as the preeminent entertainment, so technology and gaming do not have a philanthropic muscle developed, right? So they're very non-philanthropic. Google, Microsoft, Facebook, video game companies, these are not philanthropic entities. And I think in a very different way that Hollywood really was, and the big studios like, Warner Brothers really was, or Paramount, like that's a challenge. And I don't know if that's something that we can teach or we can train, or if that's something that we need to just move beyond, or but I think that's going to be a larger and larger challenge as our demographic shifts. That answers your question.
Does that include the kind of major new-ish philanthropic institutions started by people with tech fortunes?
I would say so. I mean, look at Gates Foundation is health, is environmental, is I would say that, yeah, health and environment tend to be the two things that a lot of these foundations support, and far more than arts. New foundations, it's something like 4% of new foundation dollars is going towards the arts, which is a very low amount compared to how much philanthropy is out there. Yeah.
I mean, we have quite a similar issue, but the details are totally different. So GMHC was incredibly successful at raising money from the start in some ways, and certainly through the 90s. There's a lot of major donors who are still giving to us, which is wonderful. They're aging, and they don't always come from the same sort of population that we're currently serving, which I don't think is necessarily a problem, right? I think actually it's incumbent on all of us to be philanthropic for all people, or for people who, maybe especially for people who don't look like us. But there is a little bit of a disconnect, right? Like we have this kind of donor group that is from one era of the agency. And they're wonderful, and I want them to stay involved. I just also want to grow it so that it reaches, so that we reach people, who want to support the work we're doing now. And who, maybe come at it from a different perspective, or are younger. I mean, there's sort of, new people who are more newly giving money to nonprofits. So, I mean, I think that's your point about the need to evolve. Like, I don't think we have a problem reaching young people. Like we just, this weekend, we have something called the Latex Ball. It's a voguing competition at Terminal 5. It's packed. It's like a kind of part of this thing called the House and Ballroom community. It was incredible, and it was full. So it's not like we're not connecting with young people. It's just that we're not totally moving our donor base in the way that you're describing.
Right.
Can I go back to something that you asked before? So you asked us how we inform each other, or how we work together. I'm not exactly, we could talk about some kind of like high-minded way that we've thought about collaborating, or like the kind of need for better cross-org collaboration. But I also just say that I worked at Viacom, so now Paramount, for 12 years. Part of that time I worked at Logo, which is was this LGBT network that they launched in 2005. I started working there in 2006. It was kind of the first of its kind. It doesn't totally, I mean, it sort of exists now, but it doesn't totally exist. Its big major contribution to society is RuPaul's Drag Race, which launched on it, and I was there when that happened. But I didn't work at Logo the whole time. I also worked at other Viacom brands. And when I left Viacom after 12 years, I looked back at my time and said, what did I really like? And it was very clear that among my favorite things was the sort of mission-driven element of working at Logo. We weren't a mission-driven organization. We were a for-profit media company making commercial media products. But especially at the very beginning, so when a network launches, it doesn't have ratings because ratings have a cost associated with it. So then you have to get to a certain size before the cost is worth it. So for the very beginning, when I was working at Logo, we had no ratings. So like we were just putting stuff on. I was working on digital content, but like we were putting stuff on all our platforms that we thought would be good for LGBTQ folks. Maybe we didn't say Q at the time. And that was kind of incredible, right? Like it was this opportunity to feel like I was doing something like to advance culture or to advance equity. So I look back at that, I felt like, how can I make that part of my professional life? And I called Aziz, and he was running BRIC at the time. And BRIC is this nonprofit media institution in Brooklyn. I kind of didn't even know anything about that there were nonprofit media institutions. But I knew it was related to the public access channels, which I always thought was cool because I grew up in New York and watched public access on TV. And so I went to him and he said, well, come, produce this thing. Or I don't know, maybe I brought a project to you and you said, produce this thing for me. And it was really this like intro into nonprofit organizations. I had been on the board of a couple, so I knew something. But it led me to really think about how I could work in nonprofit, in the nonprofit sector, or sort of in mission-driven work or in impact work. So then in the middle of COVID, this kind of call from a former colleague from TED came, asking whether I wanted to do a 3-month consulting job on a climate change related project that they were doing. And that led to 5 years of working and then leading some of TED's impact work. And that's why I am ready to the extent that I'm ready to do the job that I'm in, which I think I am. It's because of all of that. And we met on the first day of freshman year. We met on Old Campus. I don't know where we met. We lived in Welch, which is an old campus. And I remember meeting you sort of as soon as I got there.
Yeah. Very early on. Yeah. If not the first day, then the summer.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's funny. I forgot about that. Yeah. And we have done projects together over the years here and there. I got involved with nonprofit. So I was working in documentaries in Washington, D.C. And I was really enjoying it. And I did a lot of great work. This was during the time when they would send you out to the field to do a film on Teotihuacan in Mexico or something, like these great archaeological digs all over the world. And I did a lot of work in the Amazon. And then I was there during the first big media change when those types of programs were getting phased out and in favor of reality TV, because reality TV was cheaper and it didn't quite get the same ratings, but it got close enough and some of them did really, really well. So everyone stopped producing these expensive National Geographic or what was then History Channel style, big programs, and started producing reality TV. And I was kind of bummed by that. I still made some reality TV shows that I'm a little unproud of. And but so I started this company to do mission-based documentary work. And our first clients were the Smithsonian and the Morgan Library. And I was realizing that a lot of the cool kinds of storytelling that I was really drawn to and that was really exciting to me to tell were these actually being funded by nonprofits, and even more specifically by museums. And that's where I and then when this job at BRIC that Jon was talking about opened up, where BRIC had spent 9 years basically in litigation trying to establish the legal framework and the funding to launch a nonprofit community-driven TV network in New York City. And then when they did it and they looked for an executive producer, I was like, oh yeah, this is perfect for me. And that's when I went to Brick. Now, unfortunately, that was a brief moment, but the pandemic kind of undid. But yeah.
That's great. So I want to open it up to questions, but I just want to say, you just reminded me, both of you, in sharing your narratives about your nonprofit journeys, reminded me of one of my favorite stats. There are over 180,000 Yale alums globally today. And Yana, we estimate that 2 out of 3, that's a population of 120,000, are somehow involved in social impact, whether as CEOs or EDs of nonprofits, whether as board members, volunteers, mentors. But it's a big population. I mean, we really feel that it's part of the Yale ethos to get back and to serve. So I want to open up the questions. Kristen, I'm not sure if there's anyone in the chat. Let me ask one more and then we'll open up to the room as well.
Yep, and I have a question from chat as well.
Okay, so let me just go with one more, which relates to what I just said, and that is a lot of young people now, alums, whether Yale alums or not, but are looking at social impact careers. I personally came from the private sector, went to nonprofit. If someone is exploring a nonprofit career, maybe both of you could give your advice on how they might find that path, how they might find their calling.
I mean, I don't know. My path was obviously very strange, I think, and unorthodox. And I had a lot of jobs even before I got into documentary film. I worked in Argentina as a chef. I was a 6th grade teacher in Morocco. I did some stuff that is kind of odd. But I will say that I think that right now, nonprofit work is one of the most strangely stable and rewarding lines of work. I think that the media industry is obviously in total disarray. Same thing with the tech industry, and what we do at the museum is about 95% in person. There's no AI that's going to replace that. We are a place where we're laser focused on providing community care. And unfortunately, as kind of social networks and infrastructures get eroded by, the lack of federal funding, for example, these nonprofit institutions, especially those that work in an in-person way that both John and my organizations do, I think are going to be increasingly important and frankly, increasingly called on, like the library, to kind of fill those holes in the social safety net. And I think that that's something that we already see is happening in the museum, because we're not just a museum, we're also a cooling center when it's hot. We've just brought a brand new HVAC system so that we can be really cold, and it's been working beautifully.
We early vote there.
We early vote there, exactly right. So we are serving a lot of these, and we are a free space during the weekends. We're a daycare, we are a low-cost cafeteria, so we have all of these other roles that are providing kind of community care as and I think that's a really good thing to think about if you're getting involved in the nonprofit world, is that something that appeals to you, and are you kind of I have one more story very quickly, which is when I first got there, there was something that Eric Adams was calling the migrant crisis, but was there were a lot. I walked into the building through the staff entrance, and lined up against the wall, there were about 70 people from Venezuela with their backs against the wall, and it was a pretty hot day. And I walked into the museum and I asked our head of security, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on out there? Is there a line? What's going?" He's like, No, there's just that they're just picking up our free Wi-Fi. I got to talk to Mauricio about cutting that off." And I was like, no, don't cut that off. this is clearly a need. Open the doors and let them into the air conditioning so that we can have, this is obviously a need that the community has. Like, it's not costing us anything. It's free Wi-Fi. Like, let's make sure that that's available. So, and it's cool. I don't know if that answered your question.
I would say, look, I'm not somebody who had a very clear experience with a calling. Like even before going to work at Viacom, I graduated from college. I went to work on a website. It was the end of the first .com boom. So I started as an intern. 3 months later, I was like running half the site. 4 months later, I was running 3/4 of the site, and then 5 months later, it was closed. But I knew I had some kind of interest in media, but I didn't know exactly what to do. So then I went back and got a master's in a field called performance studies from NYU. And like kind of fell into the MTV job that started my Viacom career. So, my first advice to somebody would be to say, like, you kind of actually don't know what you want. And the challenge is to find a thing that interests you enough that you can go down that path and then see where it takes you, and don't kind of over program, like don't over plan what's coming, because it's kind of bound to fail on some level. But having said that, for somebody who does want to do this work in a nonprofit, and just that's a very broad thing, right? Like this, your nonprofit is very different than our nonprofit, very different than the last nonprofit I worked at. Like there's a lot of different opportunities. But the thing I'd say that I've seen at GMHC so clearly is that people are really committed to the mission. Like they're there because they want to help people who are living with HIV or impacted by HIV, or they want to create more equal health outcomes broadly. Some people are there for very personal reasons. Some people are there, because somebody told them about it and they were moved by it. But so I guess first I say, like, try and find places that you're passionate about the mission. And then once you get there, it's also a job, and you need to make sure you're thinking about it as a career. And that, a lot of times with our staff, I talk about, like, it's really wonderful that you're all so committed, and it is. But also, it's okay if you have a HR issue, or you have a complaint that you want to talk about, or you want to talk about your career growth, like all of those things. Like just because we're doing mission-driven work, those things also still apply. And I want GMHC to be a place where people feel both good about the work that they're doing, but also good about their experience as a worker.
Terrific. Okay. Kristen, any questions?
Yeah, happy to jump in here, and just first want to share that I was in Welch as well, so good vibes. And also just really moved by both of your comments tonight, in particular this last sort of question around care of our community, whether it's care of our community of workers and ensuring that nonprofits are spaces where employees can grow, or leveraging our spaces for the greater care of community, such as turning the museum into a cooling center, which is very poignant during this week. So just really inspired by both of those. But I do have a question from chat, which is from Liana. And you guys touched on this a little bit, but I'd love to hear kind of a little bit further what you're thinking is how, or if you're deploying new strategies or shifted your storytelling or messaging in response to the current climate as it relates to the role of arts or federal funding for services.
You mean like how is the federal funding affecting us?
Yes,
So,
and kind of preemptively, are you also, if it's not directly impacting you, or are there ways in which you're adjusting strategies to kind of preserve yourselves?
yeah, we're zeroing out that part of our budget. I mean, it was the first things from the art side that were IMLS and the NEH, which are both federal agencies that have supported the museum and that we had active grants with. Those were, the entire organizations were dissolved. The employees were fired, and not mine, the federal employees. And we had a heads up, and we had a really, really on the ball team who were able to get all of our IMLS funds released before they closed shop. But the NEH was gone. You know, it's a problem. I mean, and it's also, I mean, these are tiny organizations that they should be the first to be targeted was kind of ridiculous, along with USAID. I mean, it tells a lot about the priority of this administration. But you know, we move on. I mean, we can absorb it. We're luckily the museum is in a healthy enough place where attendance is through the roof, and we get some city funding that's been untouched, and our state funding has been fine as well. So far we'll be fine. It just sucks. You know, no one's going to lose their job at the museum because of these cuts. But we have had to cut programs and look for funding other ways and make them up in other, you know, make up these holes and ask, you know, people who have the capacity to try and, you know, fill the holes that those federal dollars have left in our fiscal year 26 budget. But I don't have any like real brilliant solutions. It's like, yeah, they went to zero. It sucks.
So our federal and our government funding picture is maybe more complex, and like, yeah, if we were to zero out those, if they were all to go to zero, then we'd have major existential issues, but I don't think that's gonna happen. You know, the question, so we have a bunch of different funding streams. Some of them feel more threatened than others. There are specific things in the budget bill that if it's passed as currently articulated, would impact us. There are other things where it's a little less clear. We also, for example, for some of our services, we bill Medicaid. So if there are Medicaid, depending on how the Medicaid cuts work, that could be a problem. Although also many of our, you know, one of the sort of paths around Medicaid is the imposition of more stringent work requirements, and a more regular recertification process for people to prove that they're working or disabled. But many of our clients clearly qualify for disability, so we already are helping them navigate a very complex healthcare system. So there are ways in which, so like, our plan is to, you know, try and minimize the damage, minimize any damage if it's coming, and then also develop other models for funding that work or for serving those clients. And so that's where I think the messaging question comes about, where like, one is how can we tell all the basic stuff that I was talking about, the storytelling stuff, like how do we articulate an urgent message for today, just feels even more important. Like we have to go to private donors, we have to go to local electeds who are very much on our side and are wonderful. We're incredibly lucky to be in this state, and make the case, right? And then in terms of the, you know, the part I don't have a great answer to, because I just don't know that there's a great answer, is like, there are some core things about who GMHC is, or who we serve, or what our values are, that are uncompromisable, right? Like we have stood for something for a long time through various climates, through various environments, and our community would be hurt if we didn't continue to stand by them, and I feel an obligation to our community and our clients. On the other hand, I obviously don't want to make unforced errors in public that lead to some bad outcome for our clients. And it's hard. Like I don't have a perfect answer. There are some organizations that are in our peer group. There's like some organizations that are super activisty, like that take every opportunity they have to be out there screaming. There's others that don't say anything, and you know, I think we've historically been somewhere in between. I think some mix of speaking powerfully about being in the conversations about the issues that matter to us and speaking powerfully in public is important, balanced with some, you know, realization that I don't need to have an opinion about everything, and I don't need to be in every article that somebody asked me to be in. But I don't know. You know, like, and I want to be clear about that. Like, there isn't how to find that balance, or what the right balance is to achieve the outcomes that we want. Like, it's just not totally clear. So I think what the response then is to just be really constantly reevaluating things, like thinking about opportunities. How can we change what we're talking about? How can we be in a new place? How can we not be in a different place? How can we participate in something that a coalition is doing? And the coalition is actually really important. I think, like, I'm happy for us to boldly support our community. We have a float in the Pride Parade this weekend that I'm going to be standing on. But it's a parade with, many floats in many organizations. I'm not standing on that limb alone. And I think that's really important. And I want to create, part of what I think that the promise of, like, our relationship is that we might be able to collaborate across, outside of just our normal peer groups. For example, we've talked about, there's like an incredible history around in film and TV around HIV and AIDS. And it's super responsible for some of the cultural changes that enabled the present to be the present. So there's, like, some way to explore that too, that I think is also about, like, sort of making the message meet the moment.
How about people in this room? Any questions? If not, I have one.
If not, I have more from chat as well.
Okay, go ahead, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you both so much. A question coming in from Ed. He says, thanks for your great stories. Can you please give more examples about storytelling and the power of community? Aziz, you mentioned that your museum provides community services as well as traditional museum curatorial services. Jon, you mentioned GMHC has expanded to housing and equity issues. Can leaning into community provide opportunities for connecting to individuals, corporations, and foundations for philanthropic support?
Yeah, I mean, so this past weekend, and I think that what Jon was saying about collaboration is right on the money. Like, that's how we get through this kind of retreat of federal support. I think is working more with each other and shoring each other up and being generous in our partnerships and our collaborations. As an example, this past weekend, we had a full house all weekend because we got Bank of America through their art restoration fund to support the restoration of the baby Muppets, which had not been, I guess, seen in 30 years. They were, the foam had disintegrated or something. So Bank of America paid for these Muppets to be restored, and we unveiled them and we showed the Muppets Take Manhattan again. And, and we had a full house. We had 4,000 people on Saturday. We had a massive turnout on Sunday as well. And that's, a really simple way. Also, the Henson family then was thrilled because, someone else is preserving their father's work. And also, Muppet fans are hardcore and really intense and really wonderful, and, like, a great community to have in the museum too. So, yes, I mean, I think there's like an infinite number of opportunities for collaboration and partnership. And I think our position is like a very yes and, like, every single weekend from May to October, we have collaborative partnerships with local nonprofits, and ideally with a corporation or a foundation who sponsors it. So Simon's Foundation sponsors all of our science-related weekend events all summer. And Bank of America did this art conservation, and we had a small grant from a family foundation called the William Fox Jr. Foundation, who provided the launch, the initial launch money to get this project started. But now, even if it's not supported, just by virtue of having that many people in the building, we're selling food in the cafe, we're selling beer and wine in our 2 bars, we're selling t-shirts in the gift shop. So these programs do actually pay for themselves too, to some extent. So that's kind of my pitch on free public programming.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I'm a little early in this role to fully have sort of proven out what I'm about to say. So let's talk next year. But I think our community is the best source of stories that we have. So I mentioned before that people keep coming up to me and telling me about their personal connection to GMHC and what they did over the years. Those are really moving. You talk to our clients, it's really moving. You talk to our staff, it's really moving. Some of our staff used to be clients, so they can talk about this journey from sort of needing GMHC services to providing GMHC services. And all of this is clearly a fundraising opportunity, right? Like this, getting these things in front of new people and in front of people who have the capacity to support us or who might be inclined to support us is incredibly important. And yet it's not the core thing that we're doing at the right. Like, it's like making sure that we're meeting our deliverables for a government contract is a complicated, hard task. And so part of what I think is maybe this is a challenge for all nonprofits, but it's certainly something that I think we've been working on a lot, is how do we develop this storytelling function so that it can live alongside the program delivery and that and support it. And it's very clear to me that when we tell our stories, people respond. There's an organization called AIDS Project Los Angeles that's it was founded a year after GMHC, and it's sort of a similar type organization for Los Angeles. And they made a documentary about themselves. It aired. It did the festival circuit, and then it aired on Peacock, I think. And it's a beautiful story of the founding of this organization through to today. They are lucky because they were LA based. They had these incredible fundraisers with incredible people like Elizabeth Taylor. So they have all this archival material that made that section of the film great. But GMHC also did incredible things. I don't know exactly what the idea is, but like a sort of historical doc or kind of chronologically historical doc is one way we might tell our story. But capturing the things I've been talking about and distributing them on TikTok is like another way that we could be distributing and telling the story. I'm not saying the only option is to make a feature film, but the APLA one is cool.
Okay, we're just scratching the surface, but Kristen, how about just one more?
Yep.
Thank you.
So how do you engage community member input into determining your storytelling and messaging and priorities? And this is from Karen.
I mean, that's actually a really good question that we have a consumer advisory board that meets monthly and sometimes more than that, and is the place where clients can come talk about what's going on, talk about concerns they have with the agency, raise it to the chair, and bring it back to both the staff and the board. I think adding adding this thing to that agenda, to that group's agenda actually could be really powerful. I hadn't thought about it until right now. But I also think that part of what we need to do is go find the people in the community who we believe have the great stories and document them somehow. And so I have this very loose, I don't think I've even talked to anybody on my team about this, so it's a very loose idea. But I have this sort of idea of like a GMHC story vault where like we are capturing this, because that guy who told me that he was the first volunteer in 1980, or these two guys who told me that they met on the day the New York Times published the article about a new disease affecting the gay community. And then they've been married since and have been donating to GMHC since. Like, we need to capture that.
Yeah.
And so like finding those people in the community of all types and putting it in some more permanent form feels like a really important priority.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, we have a community advisory board, which is excellent, and that meets regularly at the museum. We also have a program called Open Worlds, which is another free community program at the museum that is community curated. So we have a group of volunteers who work at the museum, but they're volunteers from all the different departments. So curatorial, housekeeping, security, operations, and they select, and then they meet once every month or so, and they select, and anyone can nominate programs. There's a form on our website. Anyone can suggest programs, and they then select, this group selects programs, and they have a budget and they put them on for free. So that's another way that we bring community programming and community curation into the museum. But then honestly, the most powerful from my point of view is just the stuff that people make when they come to the museum. I mean, we had a person, like a random TikToker, who did a video on our Flipboard, first on a first date that she had with a flip, and made a flip book out of it at the museum, and it went like super viral and had 1.5 million likes, and we had a line out the door for that flip book thing. You can't really make that. That wasn't desired, you know. Yes, it was desired, but we didn't program it. We got lucky, but we got lucky because we're constantly trying to invite people into the museum and create that kind of place. So that's the most effective, is when it happens organically and people do it because they love the place and because they love what they get to do when they walk through the doors at our institution.
Okay. You know, I always like to mention that in 2015, Peter Salovey, in his baccalaureate to the graduating class, he told the seniors, he said, your purpose as a Yale alum is to practice tikkun olam, which is the Hebrew term for preparing the world. And how about a big hand for both Jon and Aziz for their role in tikkun olam?
Thank you.
Really great work. And thank you for our audience that's tuning in. Thanks, Kristen.
My pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys.
Nice to see you.
Thank you, Ken.